In a game like Skyrim, it's easy to overlook the quiet people. The world is filled with shouting Nords, storming battle mages, and ancient dragons clawing their way out of time. Cities burn, Jarls scheme, and you, the player, are usually at the centre of it all. But if you ever stop sprinting from one quest marker to the next, if you wander off the beaten path, sometimes the world lets you find something else. Something forgotten. And something small. Not magical, not dangerous, just quiet and strange. If you walk through the mountains, you will come across him, in his little shack, isolated in the hills. And that's what might make him the loneliest NPC in all of Skyrim. Froki's shack is exactly what it sounds like. A tiny wooden structure half collapsed and huddled against the cliffs in the southern mountains of Skyrim. It isn't near a road, it isn't near a town, it isn't even on the way to anything really. There's no marker, no reason to come here, just stone, snow and silence. If you do find it, it's probably by accident. Maybe you were scaling the cliffs looking for the Shrine of Talos. Maybe you were chasing a fox through the trees. Maybe, like me, you were just bored of fast travelling and wanted to see what lived in the margins of the map. And then you see it. A shack, a fire, some smoke, a sign that someone actually still lives up here. Froki is an old Nord, grey-haired, worn. He greets you with suspicion, like someone who stopped trusting visitors a long time ago. He wears simple clothes, no armour, no rings. He's not a quest giver in the traditional sense. He doesn't beg for help or praise your accomplishments. He just sits near the fire watching the wind cut through the trees. But if you talk to him, if you really stay for a while, you'll learn that Froki used to be something more. A hunter, a soldier, a worshipper of the old gods. A man who once fought for Skyrim, but who gave up on it a long time ago. He's one of the only living followers of Kyne, the ancient goddess of the storm and sky, and he teaches her ways to his grandson, Hamming. But that's right, Froki isn't entirely alone, is he? But it still feels like he is. If you've ever played Skyrim from the start, Hamming might sound familiar. He's one of the first NPCs you ever meet, a child from Helgen who survives the dragon attack at the beginning of the game. You see him escape with his father as the town crumbles. And then nothing. His father disappears, his home is gone, and Hamming is never really mentioned again. Unless, of course, you find this shack. Because this is where he ended up, living with his grandfather in the middle of nowhere. No books, no toys, no friends, just a half-burnt shack, some hunting lessons, and the howling wind. Skyrim doesn't tell you what happened to his father. The game doesn't really care. And maybe that's what makes it worse, because it's not just Froki who's lonely, it's the boy too. Two forgotten characters stitched together by absence. And maybe that's why Froki always seems so angry. Froki doesn't like you. Not at first, anyway. He doesn't trust the companions, he doesn't believe in the 9 divines, and he especially doesn't believe in the Empire. To Froki, Skyrim lost its way when it forgot about the old gods, when it traded the wildness of Kyne for the bureaucracy of the divines. He sees the modern world as weak, corrupt, disconnected from the land. He speaks in quiet, judgmental tones, not bitter, exactly, just disappointed. It's easy to write him off as another cranky old Nord. But if you listen closely, Froki's anger is grief. He's mourning a Skyrim that no longer exists. A time when men lived in the mountains, prayed to the sky, and didn't need thrones or temples to find meaning. That world is gone, and so Froki left the world with it. Or maybe the world left him. If you earn Froki's respect, usually by showing interest in Kyne, he gives you a quest, but not a normal one. No kill this bandit or fetch this artifact. Instead, he tells you to visit Kyne's sacred shrines and hunt the guardian spirits that dwell there. It's a simple task. Go to another remote hill, fight a ghost animal, and then return. But the journey takes you across the wildest parts of Skyrim. Deep forests, hidden cliffs, forgotten glades. And every time you fight one of kind's guardians, you realise something. These aren't really evil spirits. They're not threats. They're sacred. They're symbols of the natural world, proud, powerful, and ancient. You're not killing monsters. You're proving that you understand them. And when you return to Froki, he doesn't cheer. He just nods. Like you've finally learned something he's known for decades. Talking about Froki's home, it isn't cozy. The walls are crooked, the floor is cracked, there's no food on the table, no clutter, no warmth. There are almost no visitors except for myself and other players. No signs of trade, no books, no notes, no letters. Froki doesn't even have 2 beds, one for him and one for his grandson. So I'm assuming they sleep in the one bed. But maybe Froki's shack wasn't meant to last. Maybe it was meant to be temporary, a place of exile, or pilgrimage, or mourning. But years passed, and the world didn't ask for him to return. So he didn't. That's the question that lingers long after you leave. Did Froki really choose this? Did he walk away from civilization because he believed in something greater? A forgotten god? A purer way of life? Or did he lose everything and build his life out of the ruins? We'll never really know, will we? Skyrim doesn't really give us any answer to this. Froki doesn't have a good backstory quest or a personal journal or a friend who speaks about him in town. He is utterly and completely disconnected from the rest of the game. And in a world where everything is usually tied together, from Daedric cults to court intrigues, that kind of disconnection is rare, because it almost feels real. People like Froki exist. People who lose faith in the world, who retreat, who vanish into the hills, not because they hate people, but because they've been hurt by them too many times. Froki's not a villain. He's not even a hermit. He's just tired. Froki doesn't die in a grand battle. He doesn't leave behind a powerful weapon or a buried secret. When the game ends, he's still there. Still sitting by the fire, still raising a boy who lost his home. Still praying to a god no one remembers. And maybe that's what makes him the loneliest NPC in Skyrim. Not because he's alone, but because he's untouched and unclaimed by any major questline, any war, and any epic conclusion. He exists entirely outside the game's design, which means Froki isn't really here for the player. He's here for himself. Froki's shack isn't a dungeon. It's not a shrine. It's not even marked on most maps. It's just a shack, a house, in the mountains, slowly decaying under the snow. But it holds something that most places in Skyrim don't. Stillness. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of grief, of memory and of choice. Because Froki isn't a forgotten character. He's a character who chose to forget the world. And somehow, that's kind of more haunting. The wind never stops blowing around his home, the fire never quite warms the room, and the boy, Hamming, never says much of anything. But they're there, together, waiting for something that probably won't come. Maybe kind, maybe peace, maybe nothing. And as you leave Froki's shack and the snow begins to swallow the roof behind you, you might realise you weren't really meant to find him. But now that you have, you won't forget him. In Skyrim, everyone has a job. Merchants sell things, guards say things, and Jarls sit on chairs and argue about things. Even Fandel in Riverwood has a job. He walks back and forth between a stump and a woodpile, chopping firewood forever, as if his AI brain is powered by splinters. But the point is, they all matter. If you pop open the console, click on an NPC and peek behind the curtain, you'll see it. Faction tags, daily routines, AI packages, dialogue trees. Every NPC is plugged into the machine. They're little gears in a very large, very buggy medieval clock. Every NPC except one. She doesn't talk much, she doesn't sell anything. She has no family, no town, no meaningful connection to any questline. She doesn't even have a real name, just a first name, one word. But she's always there, in every playthrough, in the exact same place, waiting. South of Falkreath, past the Black Lake and through a chokehold of pines, you'll find her. You have to want to get there. There's no main road, no quest marker. Just wander far enough into the mountains and the trees start crowding in. The music cuts out, snow starts to fall. You see wolves instead of bandits. You pass into that kind of quiet only Skyrim can do. The kind that feels like the rest of the game has forgotten to follow you. And then you see the cabin. It's not haunted, not on fire, not swarming with cultists or vampires or necromancers with names like Zaril the Blackened. It's just a cabin. A little wooden bridge over a stream, some practice dummies. It's all very peaceful. And outside the cabin, bow on her back, calm expression on her face, is her, Angie. She says hello. You say hello back. And then she just exists. At first glance, Angie seems straightforward. She offers to teach you how to shoot a bow. It's simple. Hit the targets, get some free arrows, earn a few skill points. She even tells you a little bit about herself. Her parents were killed by the Thalmor. She came out here to live alone, and she wants to be left in peace. It's a neat little detour, a side activity like mining ore or finding a weird bug in a jar. But once you finish her archery training, that's it. No follow-up quest, no new dialogue. She doesn't become a new follower. You can't marry her, you can't send her to one of your Hearthfire homes to be your personal archer in residence. She doesn't even acknowledge you after that. You train with her, she says thanks, and then she just goes back to standing, like nothing happened at all. Skyrim is full of self-contained characters. Froki living in a cave with his grandson, the ghost of old Rolden Inn, the skeleton sitting at a dinner table on top of a mountain for no reason at all. But even these oddballs usually tie into something else. A quest, a Daedric artifact, a Radiant event, a weird joke. Angie doesn't. She's not part of any faction. No one mentions her. She never leaves her cabin. She has no enemies, no allies, no story arc. She's a rock in the stream. The water just flows around her. Which begs the question, why is she here at all? If you dig into the creation kit, the dusty attic of Bethesda's imagination, you start to find traces. Angie's cabin is flagged as a player safe house, which is rare. The tag means you can sleep there, store items, live there, and the game won't eventually reset or eat your loot. But Skyrim never tells you this. There's no note on the table, no mention in dialogue, no fast travel icon. Bethesda created a whole safe house and then didn't put up a welcome mat. It's like they built the skeleton of something bigger and then just stopped. Maybe she was supposed to be a follower. Maybe she had a role in a cut questline about Thalmor or the Civil War. There's a line in her dialogue about fearing she'll be hunted, but the threat never comes. No one is looking for her, and no one even knows she's there. Bethesda laid down the bricks, then they went to lunch and never came back. Naturally, the community did what it always does when Bethesda leaves a thread hanging. They started knitting sweaters out of it. Some people think Angie was part of a lost faction, maybe a surviving blade or an offshoot of the Dark Brotherhood. Her archery skills, her isolation, the whole mysterious woman in the woods vibe, it kind of just fits. Others say that she was part of a scrapped mentor system. You'd find NPCs who trained you over time, like Aethys with one-handed, but maybe the system was buggy or half-finished, and Angie is just the last remnant. And then there's my favourite theory. Angie is a ghost. Think about it. She never eats, she never sleeps, she never leaves her property. She speaks in soft, static lines that never change. If you kill her, and you can, there's no bounty. No one reacts. It's like the game doesn't acknowledge her existence at all. Like she's already dead, just lingering. In Skyrim, we're trained to evaluate NPCs like vending machines. Can I marry them? Can they follow me? Do they give me loot, XP, a quest? Angie doesn't do any of that. She gives you a few arrows and some advice, and then she's done. which is probably why most players forget about her. She's not marked, she's not repeated, she's not important. But maybe there's a point. Maybe she exists precisely because she doesn't do anything. Because in a world that's constantly handing you objectives, Angie is just present. No monster to slay, no dialogue wheel to grind through, no skill tree to max out. She's a human moment in the game of godhood. And that might just be the rarest thing in all of Skyrim. Angie is lonely, but not in the dramatic violin swell kind of way. Skyrim doesn't really do that. Her loneliness is quieter than that. It's in the silence after she stops talking. It's in the second bed that no one sleeps in. It's in the way she just stands there, all day, not doing much of anything. Not waiting, not watching, just existing in a space that no one else ever bothers to visit. And it's not the sad kind of lonely either. Well, not exactly. It's just the absence of things. Of movement, of conversation, of purpose. Skyrim is full of NPCs with routines and routes and radiant quests that make them feel alive. Angie has none of that. She's not part of the story, she's the pause between stories, the breath you take before fast travelling somewhere louder. And once you notice it, once you feel that quiet hanging around her, it sticks with you. We all know loneliness is baked into Skyrim. You're the Dragonborn, the Chosen One. You're everywhere and nowhere at once, saving towns, toppling kings, talking to gods. And yet somehow you're always a little bit apart. You're not from here, you're through here. And every now and then you meet someone who feels the same. Angie is one of them. She doesn't want to help, she doesn't want glory. She's not waiting for a hero to solve her problems. She just wants to be left alone. You can join her for a while, sleep in the spare bed, sit by the fire, practice your aim. But eventually you'll leave, and she'll still be there, in the same spot watching the snowfall. Or maybe not watching at all, maybe she's just existing. Skyrim is a loud game. Dragons, dungeons, shouting people off cliffs. But every once in a while, it whispers. And sometimes it whispers in the form of a woman in the woods who wants nothing from you, gives you nothing grand and leaves you with nothing but a question. Maybe Angie doesn't do anything. Maybe she just is. And maybe in a world built on utility, that's the most remarkable thing of all. Skyrim is full of characters who demand your attention. Ulfric shouts his rebellion from Windhelm's throne. Maven Blackbriar casts her shadow across Riften. Even the smallest villagers, farmers, miners, hunters, usually serve some identifiable purpose in the vast clockwork of the game. And then there's Nafi, a beggar who lives on the edge of Ivarstead, in the ruins of his family's house, scraping by in dirt and despair. You don't find him unless you're looking, and if you do, the game itself seems unsure what to do with him. He is lonely, broken, and largely ignored, both by the town he lives near and by the narrative of Skyrim itself. Nafi is not just a side character, he's a wound in the world building, an NPC so isolated, so forgotten, that his very presence feels like a mistake, and yet he lingers. His life reduced to ashes, but why? Ivarstead is already a strange town, a waypoint between Whiterun and Riften. It is best known as the final stop before the 7,000 steps up to High Hrothgar. For most players, it's a pass-through, a place to grab supplies, listen to rumours, and then begin the climb to meet the Greybeards. But if you walk just outside of the town, across the bridge, and towards the riverbank, you'll notice something peculiar. A burnt-down house, collapsed, abandoned. Inside the ruins, you'll hear muttering, and then you'll see him, Nafi the beggar. He doesn't greet you like other NPCs, he doesn't stand tall, he doesn't have a job, doesn't contribute. Instead, he shuffles, mumbles, and begs. He's a man who has been hollowed out. He is in many ways the physical embodiment of absence. Nafi is not homeless by choice. His family's house burned down, leaving him destitute. His sister, Rhaeda, went missing and never returned, leaving him both orphaned and alone. The trauma shattered him, and when you meet him in the game, he is already too far gone. The villagers of Ivarstead know him, they pity him, in the way one might pity a stray dog, but no one truly ever helps him. He is tolerated but not embraced. The innkeepers will sometimes mention his state. The townsfolk shake their head, but no one offers him food or shelter or companionship. Skyrim is a land filled with tragedy, but Nafi is unique because his tragedy is not tied to prophecy, war, or gods. It is simple, domestic, and all too human. The story of a man who lost everything and in turn was left behind. If you talk to Nafi, he will mumble about his missing sister, Rada. This triggers a small miscellaneous quest, the straw that broke. You're asked to search for Rada. Her fate is bleak. You find a necklace by the river suggesting that she drowned. You return to Nafi with the news and he thanks you in his sort of broken way. That's it. That's the quest. No reward, no consequence, no major branching path. Just the quiet resolution of a man whose world is already over. Compared to the sprawling quest lines of Skyrim, the Civil War, the Dark Brotherhood, the College of Winterhold, Nafi's quest feels almost like a whisper, but perhaps that's the point. It is not about changing the world, it is about changing one's man's understanding of his loss. Still, the question lingers, why does Skyrim include this NPC at all? Most characters in Skyrim have a gameplay function. Shopkeepers sell goods, followers fight by your side, trainers teach skills. Even background NPCs serve to populate towns, flesh out culture, or connect to Radiant quests. But Nafi, he offers nothing. He cannot be married, recruited, or trained. His quest yields no material benefit. He doesn't even move from the ruins of his house. He is frozen in place, a relic of sorrow, existing only to remind players of what cannot be fixed. In this sense, he feels purposeless, and that purposelessness is precisely what makes him so disturbing. He's not just an NPC, he is a monument to futility. If you've joined the Dark Brotherhood, you encounter Nafi again, this time as a target. Astrid assigns you to kill Nafi. No justification, no backstory, no explanation. He is simply just marked for death. This transforms Nafi from a forgotten beggar into one of Skyrim's most unsettling moral dilemmas. Do you kill a broken man already destroyed by life simply because you were told to? When you approach him, he doesn't resist. He doesn't even seem to understand. He just wanders, starts running, muttering obliviously. Striking him down feels crueler than killing any bandit or soldier. But the game doesn't care. The Dark Brotherhood rewards you all the same. His death changes nothing. His absence barely even registers. It is as if the world of Skyrim, like the people of Ivarstead, have already forgotten him. Nafi's existence raises fascinating questions about Skyrim's design. Why include such a character? Why give him no real role, no meaningful quest, or no redemption? The answer may lie in contrast. Skyrim is full of chosen ones, heroes, villains, and gods. By comparison, Nafi is a reminder of the people who slip through the cracks. He embodies the theme of isolation, showing what happens to those who are too small, too powerless to be swept up in prophecy. His placement in Ivarstead is deliberate. Travellers pass through here on their way to High Hrothgar to seek enlightenment, to hear destiny call. Nafi sits just outside of that, close enough to be seen but far enough to be ignored. In a game about fate, Nafi has none. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Nafi is not his backstory or his role in quests, but simply how alone he feels. When you speak to him, there are no background voices cheering, no bustling market sounds, no friends approaching, just the wind, the ruin of his house, and his muttering. The silence is louder than any dragon's roar. It communicates despair in a way combat never could. Players who stumble upon Nafi often leave unsettled. They remember him not because he was important, but because he was forgotten. Skyrim has its share of outcasts and broken souls. Not Beard in Kyne's Grove, the Madman in the Reach, even Cicero the Fool. But all of them have connections, to quests, to factions, to larger themes. Nafi has none. He's not a mad jester tied to prophecy. He's not a bandit hiding from the law. He is not a mage who dabbled too far. He is simply a man destroyed by grief. And in this way, he is more realistic than most NPCs. His suffering isn't epic, it's personal. which is exactly why it hits harder. If Skyrim is about choices, then Nafi represents the illusion of choice. You can help him find closure about his sister, you can kill him for the Brotherhood, or you can ignore him entirely. No matter what you do, the outcome feels empty. There's no celebration, no recognition, no reward. His life begins and ends in quiet misery. And maybe that's the message. Not every story in Skyrim is one of glory. Some are about loss, some are about despair, and some are about lives so small they slip through the cracks. Nafi represents the forgotten people of Tamriel, the ones who don't matter to history, but still exist in the margins. What lingers most about Nafi is not his dialogue or his quest, but the guilt he plants in other players. Do you kill him and feel like a monster? Do you leave him alive knowing he'll continue to suffer alone? Do you ignore him and pretend you never saw him? None of these options feel good, and maybe that's the genius of his design. Nafi is not there to serve you, he's there to remind you that some wounds never heal. Nafi is, without question, the most isolated NPC in Skyrim. He has no allies, no purpose, no impact on the world. His only legacy is the uncomfortable silence he leaves behind. In a game filled with heroes, villains, dragons, and gods, this beggar is the reminder of what lies outside the spotlight. He is the human cost of a harsh world. He is what happens when no one cares, and that perhaps is why players remember him. Not because he mattered, but because he didn't. Skyrim is a land of grand halls and forgotten ruins. Its world is populated with castles in the sky, ancient tombs buried in frost, and cities soaked in blood and power. But every so often you stumble upon something. Something smaller, something quieter. A single door, a crumbling wall, and a barking dog. No quest marker leads you here, no courier passes a note. You just see the smoke rising from a chimney in the trees and thought, why not? And that's how most players find Miko's shack, a decaying little cabin buried in the forests near Morthal. It's not a settlement, it's not even a farm, it's just a shack with a name and a dog who waits. But if you stop, and if you step inside the small home, if you look, you'll find one of the most quietly heartbreaking places in all of Skyrim. Miko's shack is easy to miss. Very easy. It's nestled between trees and fog, near the edge of the marshes south of Morthal. No signpost points to it, no townsfolk talk about it. It doesn't appear on your map until you're standing quite near it. There's no road, just a dirt trail and some wishful thinking. When you arrive, it looks like any other abandoned cabin. The roof is slanted, the walls creak, the door is slightly ajar. But there's a detail that sticks with you before you even step inside. The barking. A dog's howl echoes through the trees, persistent and lonely, not aggressive, just desperate. As if he's been calling to someone for days, or weeks, or longer. And when you enter the shack, there's only one body, a man, dead in his bed, unnamed, undisturbed, and beside him, Miko, waiting. In most of Skyrim, animals are treated like enemies or meat. Wolves attack on sight, bears chase you into cliffs, saber cats maul travelers and leave their carcasses along the road. But Miko is different. He doesn't bark at you, he doesn't flee, he doesn't even growl when you open the shack door. He just looks at you, like he's hoping for something, like he's asking. You can choose to adopt Miko as a follower, he'll wag his tail, bark once in joy, and follow you for the rest of your Skyrim journey. He'll fight for you, wait by your side, return to the shack if he's told. But most players don't, because what Miko represents is more than just a companion slot. He's grief, he's loyalty, he's that one remaining thread tying this forgotten place to the world. A dog who stayed, even after the man who fed him was gone. Unlike other tragic locations in Skyrim, Bleak Falls Barrow, Frostflow Lighthouse, even the Lost Prospect Mine, there is no note in Miko's shack. There's one journal recounting his very last days as a Nord. And that's what makes it worse. Because when you don't get an explanation, your mind fills the gaps. Maybe the man was a hunter who died of sickness. Maybe he was a war veteran with no one left to fight for. Maybe Miko was his only family. and when death came, he died whispering the dog's name. The silence leaves more room for the tragedy, and the game doesn't offer you any closure, just a corpse and a dog, and ultimately how the corpse died. The interior of Miko's shack is bare. A single bed, a table with some rotting food, a shelf with sparse belongings. There's no fireplace, no warmth, no storage. Just the feeling that this wasn't a life, but an afterthought. Everything inside feels frozen in time, like the man died mid-routine and the world simply stopped turning. Miko still walks the perimeter. He eats nothing, he plays with no toys, the food in the bowl is stale, and the books are unread. Even the bed where the body lies remaining untouched. There's no blood, no decay, no sign of struggle. Just quiet. Like the man laid down one night and never woke up. And ultimately, no one came to check, except his humble follower, Miko. Location matters. Miko's shack is placed deliberately deep in the woods, far from towns or cities, tucked between the swampy banks of Yarlmarch and the pines of Falkreath Hold. You can see the edge of the map from here. It feels like a place meant to be missed, which makes the finding of it so jarring, because it's not a dungeon or a boss room. It's a house with a name, a shack with a door you can open, and a dog you can take with you. And for many players, it's the first time the game asks you to confront emotional isolation. Not with a tragic backstory, not with a battle, but with a moment of pause, a choice about what comes next. If you adopt Miko, he never speaks. And I guess that's right because he is a dog. But in Skyrim, it's different. He doesn't have a voice actor, no magical barks, no enchanted memories. But he follows you everywhere. He helps in battle, he whines when you're injured. He returns to the shack if dismissed. And in doing so, he becomes one of the most quietly compelling characters in the game. Because unlike Lydia or Ayla or even Barbas, the talking Daedric Hound, Miko represents something deeply human. The weight of memory. He doesn't ask for anything, he doesn't accept rewards, he just follows. Because he's always followed. And because that's all he's ever known how to do. Online communities have turned Miko's shack into a symbol. Reddit threads, fan arts, YouTube videos, and even mods revolve around this one cabin, this one dog, and the unspoken narrative Skyrim lets players build themselves. Some mods give Miko a full questline, others let you bury the body. Give the shack a proper fire or adopt it as a player home. Some even allow Miko to speak through journals or dialogue. But all of them stem from the same thing, the absence of answers. Players wanted more, they wanted to mourn, to give Miko closure, because the game never did. Unlike so many places in Skyrim, Miko's shack doesn't tie into any quests. You can leave Miko behind, loot the shack, walk away. No NPC will mention it, no world event will unfold, the shack won't be marked cleared, it won't collapse, it won't catch fire, and it won't evolve. All you did was find it, and that's it. And yet, players remember Miko's shack more vividly than most forts, dungeons, or even cities. Because it isn't about mechanics, it's about what it makes you feel. Skyrim is a game full of noise. Dragons roar from mountaintops, magic crackles in dungeons, bandits shout curses as they charge with axes drawn. But Miko's shack, it's quiet. No music plays inside, no one calls your name, there's just a dog, a body, and the wind. It's one of the few places in the game where you stop, not because you were told to, but because something real hit you. You weren't ready for it, and it made you feel something. Loss, pity, wonder. It's a lonely place, and that loneliness tends to stay with you. Players don't need to visit Miko's shack. There's no reward, no challenge, no achievement. And yet many return. Not to loot, not to quest, but to remember. Some bring Miko along on their adventures, others build nearby houses using half-fire, just to keep him close. A few simply revisit from time to time, stopping by to check on him like an old friend you've left behind. It's not about usefulness, it's about connection. A little shack, a quiet death, a loyal dog. And that feeling that somehow you were meant to see it, even if no one told you to look. There are many places in Skyrim that shake you. Bleakfall Barrow stuns with its size, Labyrinthian dazzles with its history, Blackreach haunts with its scale, but Miko's Shack, it whispers. It doesn't try to impress, it doesn't even try to explain. It just shows you something simple, something sad, something real. A dog, a body, a silence, and a door that never closed. In Skyrim, every settlement seems to have its place. Whiterun is the heart of the central conflict. Riften is bustling with thieves and corruption. Dawnstar dreams in Daedric nightmares. Even the smallest villages like Iverstead serve as crossroads for major quests, emotional beasts, or exploration. And then there's this one place. A named town with people, with homes, with a map marker, and with dialogue. But somehow, with no reason to exist. There's no Jarl, no court, no guild influence, no main storyline tether, and after the first time you pass through it, the game never really asks you to return. So why does it even exist at all? You'll find Kynes Grove, southeast of Windhelm, a short walk off the main road. It's not hidden, not hard to reach, and it's even got a stable, well, Windhelm stable, sitting just outside of it. From a distance, it looks like a functioning little hamlet, trees swaying over rooftops, a couple NPCs tending a fire, a longhouse quietly holding its breath. But then you get closer. There are no guards, no shops, no walls, no town square. And the inn? It's half empty, operated by a single woman who never seems to leave the counter. You realise that Kynes Grove is smaller than even some of the bandit camps, but it's still got a name, and it's got a marker, and it's still on the map, which only makes the silence seem even more louder. Now, Kynes Grove does have one brush with the main story, the quest A Blade in the Dark. It's here that you, alongside Delphine, witness Alduin resurrect the dragon at the nearby burial mound. It's dramatic, explosive, a huge narrative beat. And afterwards, nothing. You kill the dragon, Delphine leaves, the townsfolk barely react. There's no follow-up dialogue, no rumours, no acknowledgement that a literal god dragon brought a corpse to life 10 feet from someone's home. No new guards patrol, no new quests come to you, not even a second look. Kynes Grove returns to what it was before, a named town that the game quietly walks away from. One of the only active features of Kynes Grove is Steam Scorch Mine, located just behind them inn. It's a malachite mine, rare by Skyrim standards. There are only a few in the whole province, and it's guarded by absolutely nothing. No lock, no guard, no magical threat. Inside, a couple miners chip away endlessly at glowing green ore. They never leave, they rarely speak, you can take the ore, and no one really cares. There's no quest that asks you to gather it, no guild mentions it at all, no economic consequence tied to its use. It's just there. Like the town itself, always functioning and never really essential. There are roughly 7 named NPCs in Kynes Grove. All of them are background characters, none of them hold influence beyond the town. None are marriage candidates, and none give major side quests other than some miscellaneous find this and find that quests. You have the woman Idra, who runs the inn and complains about how much she hates it there. You have the Dunmar conjurer who helps keep the mine from collapsing, the twin sisters and miners who have nothing but small talk to offer, and an old miner who never leaves the settlement. You quickly get the sense that no one here is happy, but no one leaves either. It's not a town filled with pride or heritage. It's a place of inertia, characters caught in a loop, waiting for a purpose the game never really gives them. Even the innkeeper who complains about the place endlessly will never move, even if you try to help her, because ultimately there's nowhere for her to go. Kynes Grove by name suggests spiritual significance. Kyne, the Nord goddess of the storm and widow of Shore, is revered across Skyrim shrines. She is the giver of breath and the protector of life. Surely a place called Kynes Grove, literally Kynes' sacred grove, should carry some religious or cultural meaning. Well, it doesn't. There's no shrine here, no sacred grove, no mention of Kyne from the locals. Even in the midst of the trees and the steaming calf, There is no ritual, no legacy, and no identity. The game gives its name with mythical potential and fills it with not really much at all. A spiritual void disguised as significance. Behind this place is a stretch of rocky terrain punctuated with geothermal vents, steaming fissures that hiss and glow. It's one of the only places in the game with that specific geological feature, and it makes the town feel unique. There's no other village with this blend of alpine and volcanic atmosphere. And yet it's never explained. Not used, not explored, no one studies the vents and no one fears them. They're just another visual detail in a town that could have mattered, but somehow doesn't. Even the name of the mine, Steam Scorch, suggests intensity, but it leads to quite literally nothing. Just fog and just heat, and only 3 people you can talk to who offer just small talk. And I suppose this is just a reminder that Skyrim is full of systems that could tell stories if only they were allowed to. If you're playing Skyrim for the first time, Kynes Grove seems like a detour. If you're playing it again, you realise it's not even that. It's a loading space between Windhelm and the Dragon Burial Mound, a place that gets you to a story moment. Compare that to Ivarstead, which leads to the Greybeards, or Riverwood, which connects you to every major faction. Even Dragon Bridge, barely more than a road stop, gets tangled in the Reach's political tension. Kynes Grove is just a mining camp with an inn. A quiet hillside with good lighting, but no momentum and no memory. It does, however, pose as a good rest stop from travellers who are travelling past Windhelm, but I suppose that's all it's really meant to be. There's a theory among long-time players that Kynes Grove was meant to play a larger role, possibly in the Civil War or the main questline. In proximity to Windhelm, it's a spiritual name, and the presence of both Dunmer and Nord suggests political conflict, ripe ground for tension, cultural storytelling, and maybe even Daedric involvement as well. But the story never really quite comes. There are no unused quests in the creation kit, no cut dialogue, nothing buried, just a mission. Kynes Grove wasn't broken. It was never filled. Among all the NPCs in Kynes Grove, the Stoneweaver feels like the one who had the most story potential. She's a Dunmer mage, capable of using magic to keep the mine structure intact, literally holding the town together, and yet she's ignored. She's not a steward, not even a mage college affiliate. She just stands beside the forge and does her work. She speaks with intellect, grace, and power. But no one listens, no one thanks her, and she's the closest thing this town has to a priest, a wizard, a leader, and a jarl. But it's as if the game forgets she's even there. Kynes Grove is the only town in Skyrim without some sort of purpose. Not because it's empty, but because it's quiet in a world that shouts. It doesn't offer glory, doesn't demand action, doesn't push a quest or reward. It just exists. And in doing so, it reminds you what Skyrim really is. A world full of places. Not all of them matter, not all of them change you, but some, like Kynes Grove, stay in your memory precisely because they never tried to. They let you wonder what could have been. And sometimes that's more powerful than any prophecy and any major city. Skyrim is filled with creatures that players never forget. Dragons dominate the skies. Draga guard ancient tombs. Falmer hunt the depths below. They're iconic, repeated, impossible to ignore. But not everything in Skyrim gets that kind of attention. Some creatures exist on the edges of the world, rarely seen, barely acknowledged, and often encountered so briefly that they're almost forgotten the moment you walk away. They don't have quest lines built around them, they don't define entire regions, and they're not designed to leave a lasting impression. They just exist, sometimes in small numbers, sometimes in strange locations, sometimes with mechanics or designs that feel completely disconnected from the rest of the game. And because of that, they slip through the cracks, not because they're unimportant, but because Skyrim never asks you to remember them. Spriggans are one of the strangest examples of a creature in Skyrim that feels both ever-present and completely forgotten at the same time. existing across the province in quiet pockets of wilderness, while rarely being acknowledged in any meaningful way. On paper, they should stand out. They are living embodiments of nature, guardians of the forest tied to the health of the land itself, with a design that is visually distinct and thematically rich. They aren't just animals or monsters. They occupy a space somewhere between spirit and protector, something ancient and reactive rather than purely hostile. And yet, despite all that, they're often reduced to little more than a brief encounter on the road, something you fight, loot, and move past without a second thought. Part of what makes Spriggans feel so overlooked is how they're integrated into the world. They don't dominate any major quest lines. They don't control large, memorable locations in the same way Falmer or Draga do. Instead, they appear in small, isolated areas, forest clearings, hidden groves, or tucked away as if they're deliberately kept at the edges of Skyrim's more active spaces. And because of that, they never build momentum in the player's mind. You encounter one, maybe two in a play session, and then they're gone, replaced by more prominent threats that demand your attention. But that quiet placement is also what makes them so interesting. Spriggans aren't meant to feel like an invading force or a dominant species. They feel like something that belongs to the land itself, something that doesn't need to expand or assert control because it already exists in balance with its environment. When you encounter a Spriggan, it's rarely because you've entered their territory in a clearly defined way. It's more subtle than that. You've simply wandered into a place where nature hasn't been disturbed, or where it's in the process of pushing back. That idea is reinforced by how Spriggans behave in combat. They aren't just aggressive creatures. They summon animals, heal themselves, and fight in a way that feels reactive rather than purely offensive. It's as if they're not trying to conquer you, but to remove you, to restore something that's been disrupted. And that distinction sets them apart from many other enemies in Skyrim. They don't feel malicious in the same way bandits or necromancers do. They feel defensive, protective, like you're the one that's out of place. And yet, despite all this, Skyrim rarely builds on that identity. There's very little narrative weight given to Spriggans, no major factions tied to them, no significant quest lines that force you to engage with them beyond their simple combat. They exist almost entirely in isolation, disconnected from the broader systems of the game. And that's where the feeling of abandonment starts to come in. Not abandonment in the literal sense, but in how underutilized they are. The foundation is there for something much deeper, a creature that represents the land itself, reacting to the actions of those who inhabit it, but it's never really fully explored. This creates an odd disconnect. On one hand, Spriggans are conceptually important. They suggest that Skyrim's wilderness isn't just passive scenery, but something alive, something capable of responding to intrusion. On the other hand, the game treats them as minor obstacles, encounters that don't carry long-term consequences or deeper meaning. You defeat them, and the forest remains unchanged. There's no lasting impact, no sense that you've disrupted anything significant. And because of that, their presence starts to feel hollow, despite the strength of their concept. Their design contributes to this as well. Visually, Spriggans are striking, humanoid forms made of twisted wood and glowing energy, with an almost ethereal quality to them. They don't feel like anything else in the game, but that uniqueness doesn't translate into memorability in the way you might expect. Because they're encountered so briefly and without much context, their design becomes something you recognize without truly engaging with. They're familiar but not significant, distinct but not impactful. There's also something to be said about how they're spaced throughout the game. Spriggans appear more frequently in certain regions, particularly in the forested areas like the Falkreath Hold or the Rift. But even there, they're never really overwhelming. They don't define those regions in the way other enemies define theirs. Instead, they're part of the background, one of many possible encounters that could happen as you explore. And that randomness further dilutes their presence. They're not something you seek out or prepare for. They're something you stumble upon. In a way, Spriggans mirror the very idea of being forgotten. They exist quietly, without drawing attention, without demanding recognition. They don't interrupt the player's journey in a significant way. They don't force you to think about them beyond the moment you encounter them. And so they fade into the larger experience of the game, becoming part of its texture rather than its focus. But that doesn't mean they're unimportant. If anything, their subtlety is what gives them potential. They represent a side of Skyrim that isn't driven by conflict or conquest, but by balance and reaction. A reminder that the world isn't just shaped by the actions of its people, but also by the land itself. And in that sense, their forgotten nature feels almost fitting. Because Spriggans don't need to be remembered. They're not part of Skyrim's story in the way dragons or factions are. They're just part of its world, quietly existing, whether you notice them or not. The Frost Atronachs is one of those creatures in Skyrim that feel like they should carry far more weight than they actually do. Existing as powerful, imposing beings tied directly to magic itself, yet somehow fading into the background of the game's wider ecosystem. On the surface, they have everything needed to be memorable. They are towering constructs of ice and elemental energy, summoned from another plane, bound to the will of mages, and capable of dealing immense damage while shrugging off attacks that would destroy most other enemies. Their very existence implies a deeper system at work: conjuration, control, and the manipulation of forces beyond the natural world. And yet, despite all that, Frost Atronachs rarely leave a lasting impression. They appear, they fight, and then they're gone, often remembered less as creatures in their own right, and more as extensions of the enemies who summon them. That's really where their sense of abandonment begins, in their lack of independence. Unlike Spriggans, who feel tied to the land, or Falmer, who have their own society and presence, the Frost Atronachs almost never exist on their own terms. They are tools, weapons brought into existence for a specific purpose, and dismissed just as quickly. When you encounter one, it's usually because a mage decided to summon it, not because the Atronach itself has any stake in the world around it. And that framing strips away a lot of what could have made them very interesting. Instead of being treated as creatures with their own identity, they become a mechanic, a function of the combat system rather than a part of the world's ecology. This is especially noticeable when compared to how other Daedric or summoned beings are handled. Dremora, for example, have dialogue, personality, and a clear connection to Oblivion that gives them presence beyond combat. Even creatures like Flame Atronachs benefit from a more striking visual identity and more frequent use, making them easier to remember. Frost Atronachs, by contrast, sit in an awkward middle ground. They're powerful but not really unique, common enough to appear regularly, but not distinct enough to stand out. And because of that, they blur into the background, becoming just another obstacle rather than something worth thinking about. Their design plays an interesting role in this as well. Visually, Frost Atronachs are undeniably imposing. Large, hulking figures made of jagged ice, with glowing cores and heavy, deliberate movements that give them a sense of weight and presence. They look like something that should dominate a battlefield, something that demands attention the moment it appears. But that visual impact doesn't always translate into narrative or mechanical significance. You fight them the same way you fight many other enemies. Avoid their attacks, deal damage, move on. There's no unique interaction, no deeper layer that reinforces what they are beyond their role as a summoned tank. And that's where the disconnect really starts to show, because Frost Atronachs represent something bigger than just a combat encounter. They're manifestations of elemental magic, physical embodiments of cold and force, pulled from a different realm and bound into service. That concept carries a lot of potential. It suggests a world where magic isn't just a tool, but a gateway to something external, something that exists independently of the player and the province of Skyrim itself. But the game rarely explores that idea in any meaningful way. Frost Atronachs don't have lore moments or narrative beats that expand on their origin or purpose. They're present but not really developed. Even in locations where they appear without a summoner, such as certain ruins or magical areas, they still feel disconnected. These instances could have been opportunities to present them as something more autonomous, something that exists outside of direct control. But instead, they often come across as static guardians or leftover constructs, placed there for gameplay rather than storytelling. There's no sense that they belong to those spaces in the way Draga belonged to tombs or Falmer belonged to the underground. They're there but not really rooted. This lack of grounding makes them feel strangely temporary. Even when they're not being actively summoned, there's always that sense that they don't fully exist within Skyrim's world, that they're only partially present, tied more to mechanics of conjuration than to the environment itself. And while that could have been used to create a sense of otherworldliness or mystery, it instead results in a kind of emptiness. They don't feel mysterious, they feel underexplored. There's also the issue of repetition. Frost Atronachs tend to appear in predictable contexts, alongside mages in certain dungeons, in the chill, or as part of higher level encounters. And while their strength makes them a notable threat, their role doesn't change much across these encounters. They're durable, they hit hard, and they occupy space. But beyond that, there's little variation. They don't evolve, don't interact with the environment in unique ways. They don't contribute to the world beyond the immediate fight. Over time, they become familiar in a way that reduces their impact. Not because they're overused, but because they're underutilized in terms of variety and in terms of where the player sees them. What's interesting though is that this forgotten quality almost aligns with what they are. Frost Atronachs aren't meant to be part of the world in a traditional sense. They're summoned, controlled and dismissed. They exist at the will of others, not as independent actors. And in that way, their lack of identity with Skyrim mirrors their role within its systems. They don't have stories because they're meant to. They don't have agency because they're not given any. They are, by design, incomplete. And that's what makes them quite fascinating. But that doesn't necessarily make it satisfying. Because even within that framework, there was room to do more, to explore what it means to bind a creature like this, to give some insight into where they came from, or to create moments where they break from that role. Instead, they remain static, unchanged, and largely unexamined. In the end, Frost Atronachs feel less like forgotten creatures in that traditional sense, and more like abandoned ideas. The foundation is there, strong design, clear concept, and a role within the game's systems, but it's never fully built upon. They exist in kind of a limbo, present enough to be recognised, but not developed enough to be remembered. And because of that, they occupy a strange place in Skyrim's world, not absent, but not truly there either, just summoned into existence over and over again, only to be forgotten the moment they disappear. Deep beneath Skyrim's surface, far removed from the open skies and familiar landscapes, there exists a creature that most players encounter with discomfort in the moment. But then they rarely ever think about them again afterwards. Not because it lacks presence, but because the presence is almost entirely confined to one specific context. Charus are not rare, they are not weak, and they are certainly not forgettable in design. But despite all that, they remain strangely absent from the broader identity of Skyrim's world, existing almost exclusively as a supporting element to something else, rather than as creatures that stand on their own. Visually, Charus are some of the most unsettling enemies in the game. Their insectoid bodies, glossy carapaces, and erratic movements make them feel fundamentally different from the more grounded creatures that populate the surface. They don't resemble wolves, bears, or even trolls. They feel alien, almost invasive, like something that doesn't belong in the same ecosystem. And that discomfort is amplified by the sounds they make. The clicking, the skittering, the sharp, sudden movements that make every encounter feel tense and unpredictable. On a purely sensory level, Charros are incredibly effective. They leave an impression in the moment, but that impression rarely lasts beyond it. The reason for that lies in how they are positioned within the game. Charros are always tied to the Falmer. Wherever you find one, you'll likely find the other. They share the same spaces, the same encounters, and often the same purpose. And while that relationship makes sense, the Falmer have domesticated or adapted to these creatures in a way that creates a cohesive underground ecosystem. It almost limits the Charros in a significant way as well, because they're never allowed to exist independently. They're not presented as a species with their own territory or behaviour patterns separate from the Falmer. Instead, they function as extensions of Falmer encounters, reinforcing the threat of those areas rather than defining them. This creates a kind of dependency that affects how players perceive them. When you think of Blackreach or Falmer hives, you might remember the architecture, the atmosphere, or the Falmer themselves. The Charros are part of that memory, but they are rarely focused in on. They blend into the experience, becoming one piece of a larger system, rather than something distinct. And because of that, they're easy to overlook when thinking about Skyrim's creatures as a whole. Not because they're insignificant, but because they're always framed as secondary. What's interesting though is that the Charros don't feel like they should be secondary. If anything, their design and behaviour suggests the opposite. They are aggressive, resilient, and capable of dealing significant damage, especially with their poison attacks. They move in ways that feel unpredictable, closing distance quickly and forcing players to react. In many encounters, they can be just as threatening, if not more so than the Falmer themselves. And yet they're rarely given the space to be the primary threat. They're always part of something else, never the main focus. There are a few exceptions. Locations where Charros appear without Falmer, or where they play a more central role. But these are rare and often not emphasised. They don't have dedicated quest lines, named variants with narrative significance, or locations built specifically around them. Compare that to other creatures in Skyrim, and the difference becomes as clear as day. Draga have entire tombs and deep connections to Nordic history. Dragons dominate the main story. Even creatures like hagravens, even though they are also forgotten, have cultural and narrative ties that give them a stronger identity. Charros, despite their unique design, doesn't have that same level of integration. This lack of narrative presence contributes heavily to their forgotten status. Players encounter them frequently enough to recognise them, but not in ways that encourage deeper engagement. There's no reason to think about where they came from, how they evolved, or what role they play being part of the Falmer ecosystem. And while environmental storytelling hints at some of these answers, the egg sacs, the tunnels, the way they're integrated into Falmer structures is all indirect. It requires the player to piece things together, and even then, it doesn't lead anywhere beyond basic understanding. Their role within that ecosystem is actually one of the more interesting aspects of their design. The relationship between Charros and Falmer suggests a kind of symbiosis, or at least a functional coexistence. The Falmer use them for somewhat defensive purposes, possibly for resources, and as a natural extension of their underground society. The Charros in turn thrive in those environments, supported by the structure and protection that the Falmer provide. It's a rare example of a fully realised ecosystem within Skyrim, one that feels interconnected and believable. But again, that strength is also a limitation. Because it ties the Charros so closely to the Falmer, it prevents them from being seen as anything beyond that system. Even their variants, like the Charros Reaper, don't fully escape this pattern. While more powerful and visually distinct, they still appear within the same context, serving the same role within Falmer-controlled areas. They add variety but not really any independence. They reinforce the existing structure rather than expanding it. In a different context, Charros could have been one of Skyrim's most memorable creatures. Their design, their behaviour, and their place within the world all point towards something unique and compelling. But the way they're used keeps them from reaching that potential. They're always part of something else, always framed as a component rather than a centerpiece. And because of that, they end up in a strange position. Not ignored, but not truly recognised either. Encountered often, remembered briefly, and rarely considered beyond the spaces they inhabit. They don't disappear from Skyrim, they just never fully emerge from beneath it. High in Skyrim's coldest, most desolate regions, where visibility fades into snow and sound is swallowed by the wind, there are encounters that feel less like combat and more like stumbling into something you weren't meant to see. Wisp mothers exist in that space, not quite creatures in that traditional sense, not quite spirits in a way the game ever fully explains, but something in between. They appear suddenly, often alone, surrounded by drifting lights and illusions, and for a brief moment, they transform the environment around them into something unfamiliar. And yet, despite how distinct these encounters feel in isolation, Wisp mothers remain one of the most forgotten presences in all of Skyrim. Part of that comes from how rarely they're encountered. Unlike Draga or Falmer, who occupy entire regions and define the spaces they inhabit, Wisp mothers are scattered almost randomly across remote and elevated parts of the map. You might go an entire playthrough only encountering a handful of them, if that. And when you do, it's often unprompted. No quest marker, no narrative build-up, just a sudden shift in atmosphere as one materialises in the distance. That rarity should make them memorable, but instead, it often has the opposite effect. Without repetition or reinforcement, they don't build a lasting presence in the player's mind like bandits or Falmer or Draga. They become isolated moments rather than a cohesive part of the world. But in that sense, that might create them to be one of the most beautiful things in Skyrim. What makes this more striking is how strong these individual moments can be. A Wisp Mother encounter feels different from most fights in Skyrim. There's an immediate sense of unease, driven not just by their appearance, but by how they interact with the space around them. The glowing wisps that accompany them, the way they fade in and out of visibility, the illusions they create during combat, it all contributes to an experience that feels less grounded and more surreal. You're not just fighting an enemy, you're trying to track something that doesn't fully behave like a physical being. And for a game that often leans on straightforward combat encounters in the early stages, that difference stands out. But that uniqueness is never expanded upon. Wisp mothers don't have dedicated locations or environments built around them, other than a few crypts and a few caves. They don't anchor any major quest lines or connect to factions in a really meaningful way. There's no deeper exploration of what they are, where they come from, or why they appear where they do. They exist almost entirely in isolation. You don't just see one wandering around in Falkreath or Whiterun. They are both geographically and narratively isolated from the world. And that isolation is what ultimately leads them to be forgotten. Not because they lack identity, but because that identity is never reinforced. There's a sense that Wisp mothers are meant to represent something, perhaps a manifestation of the cold, or remnants of lost spirits, or even a form of elemental magic tied to Skyrim's harsher climates. Their design supports that idea. They appear almost spectral, with a translucent icy form that blends into the environments they inhabit. The wisps that surround them feel like fragments, as if they're not entirely whole. And their ability to create copies of themselves during combat adds to that ambiguity, making it difficult to tell what's real and what isn't. All of this points toward a concept that is rich with potential, something that could have been explored in a variety of ways. But instead, that potential remains untouched, and I suppose, in a way, it kind of has to be. Wisp mothers are never given the space to develop beyond their initial impression. They don't evolve as enemies, don't appear in increasing complexity, and don't interact with the world in ways that would deepen their role. They're static both in function and in meaning. And because of that, they never move beyond being a curiosity. Something interesting in the moment, but not something that shapes the player's understanding of the world. Their placement within Skyrim also contributes to this as well. By existing primarily in remote snow-covered areas, they're naturally separated from the game's more active spaces. These regions are already less populated, less travelled, and often less essential to the main flow of the game. So even when a Wisp Mother appears, it's happening in a context that players may not revisit often. There's no reason to return, no ongoing presence that keeps them relevant. They appear, they're dealt with, and the location returns to being just another quiet stretch of wilderness. Even mechanically, their encounters don't leave a lasting impact. While their illusion and ranged attacks can make them quite challenging at the early stage of the game, the fight itself doesn't introduce systems or ideas that carry over into other parts of the game. Once it's over, there's nothing to reflect or adapt upon. It's a contained experience disconnected from the broader gameplay loop. And that containment reinforces their forgettable nature. They don't influence how you play beyond that moment, and so they don't really stay with you. And that might be the most fitting way to describe them. Wisp Mothers don't feel like creatures that belong to Skyrim in the same way others do. They feel like anomalies, rare, unexplained, and disconnected. But instead of that, making them mysterious or significant, it leaves them undeveloped at times, because mystery only works when it's supported by presence. And Wisp Mothers simply don't appear often enough, or in meaningful enough ways to sustain that. In the end, they become one of the clearest examples of a concept that was never fully realised. Everything about them suggests something deeper: their design, their abilities, their atmosphere. But none of it's expanded upon. They exist in fragments, much like the wisps that surround them, never forming a complete picture. And because of that, they fade. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly over time, as the player moves on to more defined threats, more structured encounters, more memorable parts of the world, until eventually they become exactly what their name suggests: a fleeting presence seen briefly and then gone. In a world as dense and iconic as Skyrim, it's easy to remember the things that demand your attention. Dragons tear through the sky, drag rise from ancient tombs. Entire quest lines are built around the loudest and most persistent threats. But the creatures we've talked about don't operate like that. They don't dominate the narrative, they don't define regions in obvious ways, and they don't ask to be remembered. Instead, they exist on the edges, in caves you don't revisit, in mountains you rarely climb, in encounters that feel isolated rather than essential. Spriggans guard forests without recognition. Frost Atronachs are summoned and forgotten. Charus live in the shadow of the Falmer. Wisp Mothers appear like illusions and disappear just as quickly. They're not absent from Skyrim, they're just overlooked. And maybe that's what makes them interesting. Because in a game built on spectacle, sometimes the most revealing parts of the world are the ones that don't fight to be seen. Skyrim is a land filled with noise. Dragons tear through the skies. Cities bustle with life. Dungeons echo with the sounds of battle and discovery. Everywhere you go, the world seems to demand your attention. But not every place in Skyrim is like that. Some locations don't fight to be seen. They don't offer quests, rewards, or even clear stories. They sit quietly at the edges of the map, easy to miss and even easier to forget. These are the empty places, the abandoned ones, the locations that feel less like part of a game and more like something left behind. Some rest along the frozen northern coast, some lay bare in bustling areas in Markarth. But when you first come into contact with an empty place, you realise something. No movement, no inhabitants, no explanation. Just the remains of something that didn't last. And in a world as loud and eventful as Skyrim, that kind of emptiness stands out more than anything else. Clam Digger's Camp is the kind of place most players will walk past without ever realising it exists. And in a game like Skyrim, that says a lot. It sits quietly along the northern coast, east of Dawnstar, where the Sea of Ghosts stretches, endlessly into a pale, frozen horizon. There are no dramatic ruins here, no towering Nordic structures carved into the mountains, no glowing markers pulling you in with the promise of something important. Just a small, weathered camp pressed against the shoreline, exposed to the wind, the cold, and the constant sound of waves breaking against ice. At first glance, it barely feels like a location at all. A few bedrolls, a cooking spit, scattered tools, and the faint suggestion that someone once tried to live here. But that's all it is, a suggestion. There are no active inhabitants, no quests to guide you, no narrative thread to follow. It exists in a strange liminal space between presence and absence, where everything points to human activity, but nothing remains to confirm it. And that emptiness is what makes it so interesting, because Clam Digger's camp isn't just abandoned, it feels forgotten. Not in the dramatic, tragic way that Skyrim often presents its ruins, with skeletons posed mid-story, or journals spelling out exactly what went wrong, but in a quieter, more unsettling way. There's no clear explanation for why it was left behind. No signs of struggle, no obvious danger, no final moment preserved in time. Whoever was here simply isn't anymore. And the game offers no answers as to why. That lack of context creates a very different kind of atmosphere, one that relies entirely on implication rather than exposition. You're left to fill in the gaps yourself, to imagine what life might have been like in a place like this. And more importantly, what could have driven someone to leave it behind? The location itself doesn't help much. The northern coast of Skyrim is one of the most inhospitable regions in the game. It's cold, isolated, and largely devoid of meaningful activity. Unlike the forests of Falkreath or the plains of Whiterun, there's very little sense of life here. The environment feels static, almost indifferent, as if it would remain exactly the same whether anyone lived there or not. And that indifference is key to understanding why this camp feels the way it does. It's not just empty, it's insignificant. Not in a designed sense, but a narrative one. This isn't a place the world cares about. It's not strategically important, not culturally relevant, not even particularly useful beyond the small, mundane act of gathering clams along the shore. Which raises an interesting question. Why was anyone here in the first place? The idea of someone choosing to live in such a harsh, isolated environment suggests a kind of quiet desperation. Maybe they were trying to get away from something. Maybe they had no other options. Or maybe they were simply drawn to the solitude, to the idea of existing at the very edge of the world where no one would bother them. Skyrim never tells you, and that uncertainty becomes part of the experience. It transforms the camp from a simple environmental detail into something more reflective, something that invites interpretation rather than delivering a very clear answer. And in doing so, it highlights one of the more subtle strengths of Skyrim's world design: its ability to create meaning through absence. Most of the game's more memorable locations rely on spectacle. Massive ruins, dramatic lighting, enemies waiting to challenge you. Clam Digger's camp does the opposite. It removes all that. There's no danger here, no reward, no sense of progression. Just a quiet space that exists entirely outside the player's usual motivations. And because of that, it's easy to ignore. There's nothing pulling you in, nothing demanding your attention. You have to choose to stop, to look around, to consider what you're seeing. In a world filled with noise, dragons, quests, battles, constant movement, places like this create contrast. They slow things down. They give the player a moment to step outside the usual loop of action and reward and just exist in the space. And while that experience might not be as immediately engaging, it lingers in a different way, not as a memorable event, but as a feeling, a sense of quiet, of absence, of something that used to be there and isn't anymore. And in a game as large and as busy as Skyrim, that kind of emptiness can be just as meaningful as anything else. Deep Folk Crossing is one of those places in Skyrim that feels important the moment you see it. And yet, the longer you stay there, the more that importance begins to unravel into something quieter, something far more hollow. Located high in the mountains north of Markarth, it stretches across a deep chasm in the form of a massive Dwemer bridge, an imposing structure of stone and metal that immediately suggests purpose, scale, and history. From a distance, it looks like a landmark, the kind of place that should lead somewhere or guard something, or at the very least tell a story worth hearing. But when you finally arrive, when you step onto the bridge itself and take in your surroundings, what you're met with is not discovery, but absence. There are no bustling ruins here, no hidden city beneath it, no sprawling dungeon waiting to be explored. Just the bridge suspended over nothing, connecting one quiet stretch of mountain to another. And that's what makes Deep Folk Crossing so strangely compelling. It feels like a piece of something much larger. But whatever it once connected to is gone, leaving behind only this isolated fragment. The Dwemer, known for their advanced architecture and sprawling underground cities, built structures with clear intent. Their ruins are usually dense, complex, and filled with purpose. But this bridge stands apart from that pattern. It doesn't lead into a ruin. It doesn't act as an entrance or a gateway. It simply exists, elevated and exposed, as if it was once part of a system that has long since disappeared. And that creates a unique kind of emptiness. Not the emptiness of a place that was abandoned in a hurry, but the emptiness of something that has outlived its own function. There's a difference between a location that feels unfinished and one that feels forgotten. And Deep Folk Crossing sits firmly in the latter category. It doesn't feel like it was meant to be more and never became it. It feels like it was once part of something meaningful, something complete, and over time that context eroded until only this single structure remained. The environment around it reinforces that feeling. The mountains are quiet, the air still, the sounds coming from the wind and the distant wildlife that barely interacts with the space. There are no NPCs living there, no signs of recent activity, no evidence that anyone has tried to reclaim or repurpose the structure. It's not dangerous, not particularly rewarding, and not tied to any major quest, which means most players will visit it once, if at all, and then move on without much thought. But if you stop and look at it, really look at it, the bridge starts to feel less like a location and more like a question. Why is it here? What did it connect to? Why build something so large in such an isolated place when you can just go around? Skyrim never answers these questions, and that silence becomes part of the experience. It forces you to confront the idea that not every piece of the world is meant to be understood, that some places exist purely as remnants of a past that can no longer be fully reconstructed. And that idea ties into something larger about the Dwemer themselves. They are one of the most mysterious civilizations in the Elder Scrolls universe, known as much for their sudden disappearance as for their technological achievements. Their ruins are scattered across Skyrim, each one hinting at a culture that was both advanced and deeply enigmatic. But most of those ruins still function, in a way. They still have mechanisms, enemies, systems that give them a sense of presence. Deep Folk Crossing doesn't have any of that. It's static, silent, completely removed from the systems that define other Dwemer locations. And because of that, it feels closer to a monument than a ruin. Not something to explore, but something to observe. A structure that has lost its context, but retained its form. And that creates a different kind of atmosphere, one that leans heavily into isolation. Standing on the bridge, surrounded by open sky and distant mountains, you're not thinking about combat or loot or progression. You're thinking about scale, about time, about the idea that something so massive could be reduced to something so empty. It's a reminder that Skyrim's world isn't just built around the player's journey. It's built on layers of history, many of which are incomplete, fragmented, or entirely missing. Deep Fog Crossing embodies that fragmentation in a way few other locations do. It's not just that it's empty, it's that its emptiness feels intentional, as if the game is deliberately presenting you with a piece of a puzzle that you'll never be able to solve. Kenstag Ruins are part of the unique places in Skyrim that feels less like a location and more like a fleeting memory, something you're not even meant to fully experience, only briefly witness before it disappears again. Situated east of Morthal in the fog-covered marshes of Yarmarch, the ruins themselves are already easy to miss. The region is flat, desolate, and choked with mist, the kind of environment where visibility is low and landmarks blur into one another. It's not a place players tend to explore thoroughly, and even when they do, Kenstag Ruins don't immediately stand out. At first glance, it's just another set of crumbling Nordic stones, partially collapsed and swallowed by the surrounding swamp. There are no enemies waiting to ambush you, no obvious loot that draws you in, no quest marker pointing you towards its significance. It feels empty in the most literal sense. But what makes Kenstag Ruins truly unique and deeply unsettling is that its emptiness isn't consistent, and it changes. Under the right conditions at night, obscured by the ever-present fog, the ruins reveal something that feels almost like it shouldn't be there at all. A group of ghostly figures locked in an eternal silent standoff, both frozen in place as if time itself has been interrupted. There's no movement, no dialogue, no interaction. Just a moment suspended in stillness. And then, just as suddenly as they appear, they're gone. No explanation, no follow-up, no way to engage with what you just saw. The ruins return to their original state, empty, quiet, and seemingly insignificant. This is what sets these ruins apart from almost every other location in Skyrim. It doesn't just lack content, it withholds it. It gives you a glimpse of something meaningful, and then immediately takes it away, leaving you with more questions than answers. Most locations in the game are built around permanence. Enemies respawn, loot resets, environments remain largely unchanged. Kenstag Ruins breaks that pattern by introducing something temporary, something that exists outside the normal rules of the game world. And because of that, it feels less like a designed encounter and more like an anomaly. Something you weren't supposed to see, or at the very least, something that doesn't want to be understood. The figure themselves only deepen that sense of mystery. The ghost you see that leads you to a tomb where bandits are trying to rob is almost contradicting of the whole place entirely. It shows that even in the most abandoned places, the worries of life can still be seen, which makes this ruin even more haunting to this day. But the game never explains who they are, what their story is, or why this moment is being played here, in this forgotten corner of the map. There are no journals, no environmental clues other than the tomb that is being raided. It's just the image itself, stark and silent. It's a form of storytelling that relies entirely on implication, asking the player to interpret meaning from a single, unchanging scene. And in doing so, it creates a different kind of engagement. You're not uncovering a narrative piece by piece. You're confronting the absence of one, trying to make sense of something that refuses to be explained. The environment plays a crucial role in reinforcing this feeling. Yarmarch is already one of the most isolated and atmospheric regions in Skyrim. The constant fog, the mutated colours, the lack of major settlements, it all contributes to a sense of detachment from the rest of the world. Kenstag Ruins fits perfectly within that landscape. It doesn't break the silence, it becomes a part of it. And when the spectral figure appears, they don't disrupt the atmosphere so much as intensify it. They feel like a natural extension of the environment, as if the land itself is remembering something briefly before letting it fade again. This makes the ruins feel less like a physical space and more like a point where the boundaries between past and present blur. A place where something unresolved lingers, not actively, but passively. waiting to be seen by those who happen to pass through at the right moment. It's also worth noting how easy it is to miss this entirely. If you visit during the day or simply don't spend enough time in the area, you might never see the apparition at all. And in that case, Kenstag Ruins remains exactly what it appears to be: an empty, unremarkable set of stones in an already empty region. And that duality is part of what makes it so effective. The Hunter's Camp with the sulfur-soaking pools is one of the rare places in Skyrim where emptiness doesn't feel unsettling, but instead it almost feels comforting, like a quiet pocket of the world that exists completely separate from the chaos surrounding it. Located near Darkwater Crossing, a region otherwise defined by mining, hardship, and the looming presence of conflict, the camp sits beside a series of natural hot springs that gently steam against the cold air. The landscape here is striking in a way that doesn't demand attention, but rewards it. Pale mineral deposits ring the water, soft light reflects off the surface, and the constant hiss of sulfur vents creates a kind of ambient stillness that feels more alive than silent. It's the kind of place that feels like it should be more important than it is, or at the very least more populated. But it isn't. Instead, what you find here is a small, almost fragile presence of life. Just 3 hunters going about their routines with no sense of urgency, no larger narrative pulling them elsewhere. And despite their presence, the area still feels empty. Not abandoned, not forgotten, but intentionally sparse, as if the world itself is choosing to leave this place alone. That contrast is what makes the location so interesting. In most cases, emptiness in Skyrim is tied to loss or absence, places where something used to be and no longer is. But here, the emptiness exists alongside life. The hunters are not struggling to survive in a harsh environment, nor are they remnants of something greater that has fallen apart. They are simply there, existing in a space that doesn't require anything of them. There's no tension, no conflict, no underlying threat that needs to be resolved. Because of that, the camp feels remarkably stable, almost timeless in a way that few other locations in the game achieve. It's not waiting for something to happen. It's not building towards an event. It just is. And that sense of stillness creates a different kind of atmosphere, one that stands in stark contrast to the rest of the region. Darkwater Crossing, just a short distance away, is defined by labour and limitation, a mining settlement where people are tied to routine and obligation. Beyond that, Skyrim itself is a province of constant motion, dragons attacking, civil war unfolding, quests pulling the player in every direction. But at the sulfur-soaking pools, all of that feels distant, almost irrelevant. The world slows down here, the usual urgency fades, and in its place there's a kind of quiet appreciation for the environment itself. The sound of the water, the movement of the steam, the way that light interacts with the landscape. These details become more noticeable precisely because there's so little competing for your attention. It's a form of emptiness that enhances the experience rather than diminishing it. And yet, despite how inviting the location feels, it remains largely untouched. The fact that there are only 3 hunters here emphasises just how underutilised the space is. In a more typical design, a place like this would be a hub, a settlement, or at least a point of interest with multiple interactions. But Skyrim leaves it almost entirely alone. The hunters don't offer much in terms of dialogue or engagement. They don't anchor a quest or provide a deeper narrative. They simply occupy the space, giving it just enough life to prevent it from feeling abandoned, but not enough to make it feel busy. And that balance is what makes the emptiness so noticeable. It's not the absence of people, it's the absence of activity, the absence of purpose beyond simply being there, which in a game so often driven by goals and progression, feels almost unusual. You're not here to complete anything, you're not here to gain anything significant, you're just here. And that can feel surprisingly meaningful, because it highlights something that Skyrim rarely emphasizes: the idea that not every location needs to serve a function. Some places can exist purely for their atmosphere, their mood, their ability to create a certain feeling. The Hunter's Camp is one of those places. It doesn't try to impress you with scale or complexity. It doesn't hide secrets or challenge you with enemies. Instead, it offers something much simpler: a moment of calm in a world that rarely slows down. And in doing so, it becomes more memorable than many of the game's more populated areas. Because those places, while full of activity, are often defined by that activity. They're tied to the quests, to the characters, to the systems that keep the player moving forward. The pools, by contrast, ask nothing of you. It doesn't push you in any direction, and it doesn't even try to hold your attention. The burnt-down house in Morthal, the one at the centre of the Laid to Rest quest, is one of the clearest examples of how Skyrim uses emptiness not just as atmosphere, but as contrast, placing something deeply unsettling right beside something that, on the surface, continues to function as normal. Morthal itself is already a strange town, quiet and fog-covered, lacking the energy of places like Whiterun or Solitude. But it is still lived in. People move about, conversations happen, routines continue. There is a sense of life, even if it's muted. And then there's the house, or what's left of it, sitting just off to the side, blackened and collapsed in on itself. It doesn't blend into the environment so much as disrupts it. It's a permanent scar on the town's landscape, something that cannot be ignored no matter how much the townsfolk might try to move past it. Unlike many abandoned locations in Skyrim, this one has a clear history, a known event tied to it, a fire that killed a woman and her child. But what makes it so effective isn't the event itself, it's what comes after. The house isn't rebuilt, it isn't cleaned up, it isn't repurposed, it's left exactly as it is. A charred skeleton of wood and ash, sitting in the middle of a community that continues to exist around it. That decision creates a kind of tension that most locations in Skyrim don't have. The town is active, but this space within is not. It's empty in the most literal sense, devoid of life, but also heavy with implication. You're not just looking at a ruin, you're looking at something that people in the world actively know about, something recent enough to still matter, and yet it remains untouched. And that raises questions, not in the same mysterious, abstract way as places like Kenstag Ruins, but in a more grounded, human way. Why hasn't anything been done about this? Why is it still here out in the open instead of being cleared away or rebuilt? The answer implied through dialogue in the quest itself. It's that this situation isn't resolved. The fire wasn't just an accident. There's something wrong beneath the surface of Morthal, something the townspeople are aware of but hesitant to confront. And so the house remains, not just as a reminder of what happened, but as a symbol of that unresolved tension. It's not abandoned because it was forgotten. It's abandoned because no one wants to deal with what it represents. That distinction is important, because it shifts the nature of the emptiness. This isn't a place that time has moved past. It's a place that time is stuck on. The rest of Morthal continues forward. People go about their lives maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But the house anchors everything in place. It refuses to let the town fully move on. And when you approach it, when you step into the remains of the structure, that feeling becomes even more pronounced. There's very little to interact with, no enemies, no loot of significance, no complex layout to explore. Just debris, ash, and the faint outline of what used to be a home. It's quiet in a way that feels intentional, as if the game is asking you to sit with the space rather than do anything about it. And that stillness contrasts sharply with the idea of a home. A place that should be filled with warmth, activity, and life. Instead, you get the opposite: cold, silence, and absence. And yet, just like within the town itself, there's more beneath the surface. The Laid to Rest quest reveals that emptiness isn't entirely empty. The spirit of the child, Helgi, lingers, tied to the location in a way that blurs the line between presence and absence. This adds another layer to the space, turning it from a simple ruin into something more emotionally charged. It's no longer just about what was lost, but about what remains, not physically, but spiritually. Refugees Rest, located along the harsh eastern edge of Skyrim near the border of Morrowind and the Dunmouth Pass, is one of those locations that feels defined not by what's there, but by what should be there and isn't. At a glance, it appears to be exactly what the name suggests, a small makeshift shelter meant for people in transit. A temporary stop for those fleeing something behind them or searching for something ahead. There are a few basic supplies, a tent, signs of survival, rather than settlement. But despite that implication of movement, of passing through, the place feels completely still. There are no refugees when you arrive, no travellers resting, no voices, no sense that anyone has been there recently. It's not bustling, not even lightly occupied. It's just empty. And that emptiness carries a very different tone compared to the other abandoned places in Skyrim. This isn't a ruin reclaimed by time or a structure left behind after some dramatic event. It's a place built for people who never came. Or perhaps came and left so quietly that they may as well have never been there at all. The surrounding environment reinforces that feeling. This part of Skyrim is cold, jagged, and unwelcome, with the looming presence of Morrowind just beyond the mountains. The Dunmouth Pass itself suggests transition, a crossing point between regions, cultures, and histories. It's the kind of place where you would expect movement, especially in a world shaped by conflict, displacement, and political tension. The Red Mountain eruption, the ongoing instability in Morrowind, the border unrest across Tamriel, all of these factors imply that there should be people on the move, seeking refuge wherever they can find it. And yet, Refugees Rest stands alone, untouched by that movement. It feels like a preparation for something that never fully materialized, or perhaps a quiet acknowledgement of suffering that the game never directly shows. That absence becomes more striking the longer you consider it. Skyrim is filled with stories of war, exile, and hardship, but many of those stories are told through active quests or populated locations. Here the story is implied entirely through the name and the setting, without any characters to reinforce it. You're left to imagine the kinds of people who might have needed a place like this. Families fleeing their homes, individuals escaping conflict, travellers with nowhere else to go. And then you're confronted with the reality that none of them are here. The shelter exists, but the people it was meant for do not. This creates a subtle but powerful disconnection between expectation and reality. The name Refugees Rest suggests life, movement, and temporary community. What you find instead is silence, and that silence feels heavier because of what the name implies. It's not just an empty camp. It's an empty promise, a place that represents safety and relief, but offers neither in practice. This is where the location starts to feel less like physical space and more like a commentary on the world around it. Skyrim is a province caught in conflict, filled with political tension and social division. It's not a place particularly welcoming to outsiders, especially those arriving with nothing. The existence of Refugees Rest suggests that someone at some point recognized the need for a place like this. But its emptiness suggests that recognition wasn't enough. Whether due to the harshness of the environment, the lack of resources, or the broader indifference of the world, the space remains unused, and that unused state becomes part of its identity. Skyrim is often remembered for its scale, its noise, and its constant sense of movement. Dragons circle overhead, cities carry on with their routines, and quests pull you endlessly from one place to another. It's a world that feels alive, or at the very least, always in motion. But what these empty and abandoned places reveal is that Skyrim's world isn't defined solely by what's happening. It's equally shaped by what isn't. Each of these locations present a different kind of emptiness. Clam Digger's Camp shows us what it's like when a place is simply left behind with no clear explanation, only the quiet suggestion of a life that didn't last. Deep Fault Crossing turns absence into something structural, a massive piece of architecture that has outlived its purpose, standing as a fragment of something we've never fully understood. What ties all of these together is not just that they're empty, but how they are empty. Skyrim doesn't treat absence as a single idea. Sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it's unsettling, sometimes it raises questions, and other times it refuses to answer them entirely. These places don't guide you, don't reward you, and often don't even acknowledge your presence. They simply exist, quietly at the edges of the world. And in doing so, they reveal something important. Not every story in Skyrim is told through action or dialogue. Some are told through silence, through stillness, through the spaces where something should be and isn't. Because in a world so full of noise, it's often the quietest places that leave the strongest impression.